I acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the stolen land on which this video was recorded and edited on, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I extend that respect to the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia. I also pay respect to the elders both past, present and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land.
Sally reading on the beat. If you know, you know. Hello babies, hello sweet chickies. Today I am going to do a winter wrap up of every book that I read this winter. It is currently the second day of spring and aren't we so abundant, The trees actually right outside this this funny little setup I've got going on today. I'll take a video for you. She's so funny. The trees have started to bloom and blossom. And aren't it so pretty? I'm so excited. So the first book that I finished in winter was Crooked Kingdom. I finished it on June 5th and I rated it 4.5 stars. What a great book that was. I have a full reading vlog for that book if you want to hear more of my thoughts, but I really loved it. It was very good. I enjoyed the audiobook. It was good. The first one is definitely better, but again, Kanej just really brought it home for me. I love them too. They're like one of my true pairings. The next book that I read was Sorted, Growing Up, Coming Out and Finding My Place by Jackson Bird. This is a LGBTQIA plus memoir about how he finally sorted things out and came out as a transgender man. I really enjoyed this. I don't know if I enjoyed it because he's really relatable to me. Like he's quite nerdy and yeah, I just felt like I'd be good friends with him in real life. So that's why I really liked his story. No, I think that his writing is really good. I gave the book a 5 stars. I finished it in a day, I think, on the 8th of June. It was really good. He grew up in Texas in the 90s and barely remembers meeting anyone who was openly gay, let alone being taught that transgender people existed outside of punchlines. And I feel like that's very indicative of the 90s, of the generation. We are very lucky as Gen Z to know and to be educated for the most part on the transgender community. I realized I haven't really been reading too much about the transgender experience, so I really just wanted to hear people's experiences. This describes it very well with warmth and wit. Jackson also recounts how he navigated the many obstacles and quirks of his transition. It was quite lighthearted as well. I mean, there was obviously transphobia, homophobia, but in comparison to another book that I'm going to discuss, it was a bit more lighthearted if you're wanting some hopeful memoir experience. I also really loved that Jackson's also a YouTuber, so it was really interesting to hear his experiences coming out on YouTube and how he dealt with that, especially at the time. So yeah, I recommend it if that sounds like it's up your alley. The next book that I finished was actually Chain of Thorns. I'm really proud of that vlog. It's fucking hilarious and I filmed my reaction to a lot of different chapters, so if you've read that book you will enjoy that spoiler filled vlog. I really loved the book. I gave it a 4.5 stars. This book is like one of the least rated books of Cassie Clare. Oh no, it rates 4 stars. Okay, I finished it on 16th of June and it is now September 2nd, like I said, so that vlog is a long time coming and I started in May. The next book that I read was Page Boy by Elliot Page. I rated it a 3.75 stars. Now, I really enjoyed this book. However, I did feel like the writing was a little bit maybe not for me. There was a lot of details in it that I didn't understand why they were being added. There's a lot of trigger warnings for this book. It's a bit of a darker side to what the trans experience can be. An important story to be told and to be seen on nonetheless. And I really commend Elliot for, writing this book. It was very vulnerable. It could have benefited from being like in chronological order. I feel like that really took me out of the story, and potentially because I read it so close to Jackson's memoir, I was comparing the two a little bit more. But I did see some reviews that were discussing what I had thought as well. It's a non-linear approach. I didn't know that going into it, and some people have said they wish the years or approximate age were given at the start of each chapter so they weren't trying to figure it out. I completely agree. I was very confused throughout the book. It doesn't have that like arc block, and maybe life just doesn't have that for Elliot. But just even like mapping the stories out to be chronologically, I don't understand the thought process behind why they were out of order when you're editing the book. Someone also says here, it was hard to read and engage with someone who so openly dissociated and hated themselves. They end up with, I'd be interested to read another one of his autobiographies in 10 years and see if any of his perspectives have shifted, now living as his true self. I feel like I agree with that mostly. It's a bit hard. Obviously, autobiographies, you want to be really sensitive about things because it's their life. I feel like it was a necessary reality to be confronted with about the trans experience. But I think, like, you know, check the trigger warnings before you go into it if this is something that triggers you. The next book that I read was Becoming Dangerous, Witchy Femmes, Queer Conjurers and Magical Rebels by Katie West, Jasmine Elliott, Kristen J. Solly. This book was a bunch of different short stories about witchy femmes, queer conjurers, and magical rebels. I gave it 4 stars. I finished it on June 29th. I really, really enjoyed it. I read it because I was going to witch school in Melbourne. It was my audiobook for the trip. I honestly can't remember too much about it now, but I think if you want to listen to some feminist, queer, witchy stories, this is probably right up your alley. The next book that I read is honestly a new big time favorite of mine, and that is none other than Everything I Know About Love by Dolly Alderton. Oh, I love this book so much. I gave it 4.5 stars, but I feel like that may change to 5 stars because of the way that, like, I've not stopped thinking about this book. My best friend Alan recently just read this book as well. We've just like been non-stop talking about how special of a book it is, how special it is to have this book through our 20s. Yeah, I really, really recommend it. If you like a little bit of non-fiction, some messy protagonists, if you're a Sally Rooney fan, I feel like you will enjoy it. I also feel like you will enjoy it if you appreciate messy humans and you want a book that reminds you that in your 20s, you know, you have time to make mistakes and figure life out. If you're not in your 20s, I still feel like you will enjoy it, like looking back on your 20s, having a book that so perfectly articulates girlhood in your 20s. Even though like I haven't experienced everything in this book, I just feel like it's so deeply relatable. All of the inner monologue that she shares and some of the dating experiences and when your friends get partners and things start changing and, you know, you're no longer in school, like it's just very relatable, and it made me feel really, really seen, and it made my friend feel really, really seen. So if that's something that you feel like you want or you need in your life, I think check it out. I think you'd really like it. I really loved the audiobook as well. She narrates it. The next book that I read was This Poison Heart by Kaylin Bayron. Kaylin Bayron wrote Cinderella is Dead. It's one of the more popular books that she's written, but I checked out This Poison Heart because I was told it is plant magic, which I love plant magic in books, and it's also sapphic, so I feel like that was really up my alley. It was young adult, which if you're not into young adult, I understand. I am no longer a young adult, but I do think it was really fun. I really enjoyed it. I gave it 4.25 stars. I think that it had, you know, some things that were a little bit like plot holey. If you're a young adult, you're obviously going to overlook these things, but as somebody who really loves high fantasy, it was weird to go into like an urban fantasy and like critique it from the same lens. But if I'm accepting it for what it was, I really loved it. And it has like a fun house full of secrets and Greek mythology and betrayal and yeah, I think like it was a little bit predictable, but if those elements seem up your alley, I feel like check it out. The next book that I read was These Witches Don't Burn by Isabel Sterling. This book I gave 4 stars. Originally it was gonna be like a 3-star book. It was really average at the start, and I started reading it at the end of June and I didn't finish it till the end of August, so it took me about a month to read, and I feel like that was my downfall because the second half of the book is so good, so jam-packed, so drama-filled, like on the edge of my seat, didn't want to put the book down. Like I was so invested in what was going to happen. For me, I felt like it was unpredictable. I didn't predict the ending, and I'm really excited to read the second one. I have it coming in the mail soon. It is an urban fantasy as well, but it's also a sapphic witch book. Hannah, the main character, she's a witch. She's an elemental witch. I was really in a mood for elemental witches. She has her ex-girlfriend Veronica, who's also a fellow elemental elemental witch. She's part of like a coven. There's also blood witches, and there's also another type of witch I can't remember the name of, and there's also regs, which are non-witches. There's like some murder mystery elements and a new girl in town that she has a crush on. It was really fun. It's also a young adult. Also check out the trigger warnings for this one as well. Yeah, I gave that one a 4 stars and I finished it on August 25th. The next 2 books that I read were so special and I read them in a night. They are Heartstopper Volume 3 and Heartstopper Volume 4. My special babies, I finished season 2 of Heartstopper and I was like, I need to read the books. I just can't wait for the continuation of this TV show. It's so special. If you haven't watched it, what are you doing with your life? I have read some of the webcomic, but I really love the specialness of having it in your hand. So I haven't been really keeping up to date with that, but I'm really excited for the next volume to come out. It tackles some deeper topics in the next few seasons, and I'm excited to see how Kit and Joe will progress. They're both just really talented and I can't wait to see it played out on screen is basically what I'm trying to say. Interestingly as well, like noticed a few things that were changed for the show. I haven't read these since last year, so I didn't really notice it when I watched the show, but when I reread the comics, realized some things they'd taken out, some things they changed around the timelines, and I actually love the way that the show's been handling those different little changes, and finished both of those on August 25th. The next book I read, I finished it on August 26th. I finished it in like 2 days. This Wicked Fate by Kaylin Bayron, the second book of the Poison Heart duology. I gave it a 3.75 stars, not because I didn't like it, but just because I felt like it wasn't as good as the first one. It kind of had like that second book syndrome. Not to say that I don't think it was fun and I don't think you should read it. I do think it was really fun. Had a bit of an adventure theme to it. I got lost with some of the new characters that were introduced. I would have loved if they were like in the first one and we could have grown with them. I felt like the love interest was a bit insta-lovey, but I mean young adult kind of is, and that's kind of the fun of it. So if you're interested in that, it's light. It's also just like reflective, and I love the magic system in it. I could really see it being turned into a TV adaptation, and I would love to see it. I always think about that, like in books, what it would look like being on TV, if it would be better as a movie, how I would do it if I was like a director. Maybe that means I need to get into film. Let me know if any of you guys do that. The last book I read in 2023 winter was none other than Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. It was so good. I have so many things to say about this book. Let's firstly start off with this quote that I found about Conversations with Friends that like wraps up exactly why I love Conversations with Friends so much. Love exists as love exists. Our mistake is giving it so many names and an institutional value. This story is a reconstruction. Even if the narrator believes herself to be reliable or not, don't believe her. Realistic contradictions. Slow and insightful. So interesting, because I was just looking at reviews and I thought about this when I was reading it, that I feel like she is an autistic character, and this review says, "Oh, Frances, my autistic, chronically ill, mentally ill queen. The modern Belger. How is Sally Rooney so good at writing characters and scenarios that feel so real?" That really like sums up my thoughts. The characters just feel so real. I remember like reading it. I actually listened to it on audiobook, which I recommend as well. The audiobook's really good. And if you're somebody who's like, just a little bit of a tangent here, if you're somebody who doesn't want to read Sally Rooney because you don't like the idea of not having quotation marks in the books, I hear that, I understand that. Listen to the audiobooks, because it makes it so much clearer and it kind of breaks down that miscommunication tool that she's tried to implement a bit more, and I find it to be a little bit more digestible. When I was listening to the audiobook, I didn't even realize it didn't have quotation marks. Yeah, when I was listening to it, I really like had a moment and I was like, these characters aren't real. How is that possible? They are real. They're in me. They're in you. They're in us. They are us. They are me. Oh my gosh, in a monologue, really like reached into like through the page, pulled it out of my brain and was like, this is you. And I just love that it was just, she was so like painfully aware of everything and then like so in denial about so many things. Perfect contradictions, like what that quote said. The four main characters, super flawed. If there's anything I love, it's flawed characters, and Sally Rooney does it so perfectly. Every line feels so deliberate and intriguing. I just love her writing saying so much. If I could write anything like Sally Rooney one day, I would, like, I literally just became speechless. Sally Rooney's characters are complicated. They make bad decisions. They're cruel for no reason. It's like being punched in the stomach because that's how real people are. That's how the real world is. So deeply true. Like a lack of emotional intelligence, constant misunderstanding, self-harm, hatred, distance, wanting to have power over others while wanting to be taken advantage of. It's just so complex, and I really, really want to reread it. I think it's like gonna be one of my top favorite books of the year. I am so surprised because I read it on such a whim. I started reading it ages ago and then I stopped reading it. Like I got maybe like a chapter or two in and I just like wasn't in the mood for Sally Rooney. You've got to be in the mood, you know, you've got to be in the mood to be with these characters who are so like deeply flawed and like self-indulgent. But I was really in the mood for a Sally Rooney time. Sally Rooney on the beat. If you know, you know. And I'm so glad that I seized the opportunity. If you've read this book, let me know your thoughts on it. I highly recommend, if you are, number one, in the mood for it, number two, appreciate messy, complex, self-indulgent, annoying characters that you can't help but love because you see all of your bad things in them. And number three, Joe Alwyn. No. Just kidding. I mean, I did start watching the TV show recently. I'm not sure if I love it as much because you don't get like the inner dialogue of her character, but we'll see. The jury's still out. You know, the different types of media, you like them for different things. I finished that book on the 30th of August, and that's the last book I read in winter. What a joyous book it was to end on. That has been my winter wrap up. I love doing it for the seasons. It's so fun. Let me know what your favorite book of winter/summer was if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. I would love to know. I feel like it's very different vibes between winter and summer, so maybe we'll get a range of different reviews. Thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely time with it. Bye.